Clearly, the smart thing to do was release a movie about an America its own apart by civil war, helpfully titled, Civil War, Top Marks for Imagination, Boys. Seriously, though, there was a whole lot of control-seeing questions swirling around Alex Garland's latest project ever. Since it was announced which side of the political divide was it going to come down on? What did it have to say about the state of American politics today? What lessons and warnings would it try to impart to us seeing it? I can confidently tell you that the answer to all these questions is no. Civil War is a movie I could best describe as a luxury sports car with no driver and no engine. Yeah, it's superficially impressive to look at and it's clearly been made with care and attention to detail. But the problem is, there's no sense of purpose, telling it where to go and nothing at its core to power it forwards. It's a movie that says, nothing does nothing and ultimately accomplished, she's nothing a film. So, deathly afraid of sparking controversy and division, but it remains neutral to the point of neutering itself, and it's frustrating, because there's clearly a lot of talent invested in this film, both behind the camera and in front of it. But with no real narrative at its core, it all feels like a lot of sound and fury is signifying nothing. The movie, certain what he assume is the near future where America is devolved into civil war after breaking up into multiple different factions. The reasons behind the conflict are left carefully ambiguous. But all we know for sure is the California and Texas have teamed up to overthrow the president and are now marching on Washington, D.C., which is a bit like Mahler and Movie Bob teaming up to overthrow Nerd Rotzig, but whatever, let's just go with it. This is where we're introduced to our main character as a country of fine upstanding journalists, which may be the most fanciful aspect of the whole movie, to be honest, who decided that they want to go to D.C. to interview the president before he's overthrown, which is a bit like driving to Berlin in 1945 for a quick interview with Hitler with Uncle Joe's finest knocking at the gates. I'm pretty sure he's got more important things to deal with right now, but sure, fine. Let's just go with it. At the head of the team, there's Lee, a veteran photographer, and Joel, a journalist who works alongside her. They're joined by Jesse, photographer with a bit of a hero worship view of Lee, and Sammy, a fat old guy who's just kind of there. No, I didn't list any particular traits, backstory, goals, or motivations for any of these characters, and not just because I'm shit in my job, but because there's nothing to say about any of them, because none of these characters have any actual character. But don't worry, I'll come back to that one later. Believe that. So the gang heads off to DC, and what follows is basically a really shit version of Apocalypse. Now with an SUV instead of a river boat, where they witness firsthand the horrors and dangers of armed conflict as neighbor turns against neighbor, and friend murders friends. The closer they get to their destination, the more intense the fight becomes until it lasts. They find themselves right there on the front line in the final battle to capture DC. Because yeah, I'm sure been totally allowed journalists within 10 miles of a war zone like that. No, it never let it be said that the drinker refuses to see the positives in a film. If I'm gonna rip this movie to shreds, I at least want to start with a bit of praise for what it gets right. So here goes. From a purely technical standpoint, the movie is impressively put together, well shot, and makes effective use of what was obviously a pretty modest budget. Alex Garland really knows his stuff as a director. There's some fantastic shots of the chaos and destruction slowly engulfing the country, and the climactic action scene is a master class of sharp, brutal, gritty combat that feels real and believable. The emotional tone never strays into the kind of cinematic melodrama you might expect from a film like this. It's much more cynical and matter of fact, an entire country physically and emotionally worn out by a war that seems to have been going time, with most people referring to just stay out of it. The cast is excellent, especially Wagner Moura, who seems to have aged backwards since starring in Narcos almost 10 years ago. Nick Offerman is great for the 30 seconds of screen time that he actually gets. Seriously, the man's a national treasure. How can you include him in your movie and not make use of him? Kaylee Spinney puts in a good show as the young and ambitious Jesse, and Kirsten Dunst looks suitably jaded. In world weary as Lee, and you know it's nice for her to get out of the house for a while. Although fuck me, I was shocked to find out that she was only 41 in real life. After seeing this movie, I honestly thought she was well into her 50s anyway. Whatever. Now, Given the subject matter, I think everyone was braced for another preachy dose of Hollywood moralism with Civil War, but to his credit, Alex Garland cites our work in thinly veiled allegories for real-world politics. It's a smart move, not to alienate half your potential audience. Shame Disney never learnt that lesson, but if you're going to invent some fantastical conflict where poor opposites, like California and Texas, have teamed up together, then you probably need to offer up some explanations in world building. And that's the problem this movie never does. Oh, conflict is more like a vaguely understood natural disaster going on in the background in an actual war with wealth-defined factions' motivations and objectives. For that reason, it's pretty difficult to get invested in any of I don't know what either sides, fighting for what they represent or what they want. I don't know how the rest of the world is reacting to it, and because none of the characters seem to care too much about which faction wins. I don't either. The obvious result of all this is that the film doesn't really to what divided America what it means for the world to have his preeminent superpower tyrant itself, apart from the inside or what new country might be born out of such a conflict. The best you can draw from it is a vague war makes monsters of us. All kind of message with both sides shown casually executing innocent civilians and surrendering soldiers, but it's not exactly a profound sentiment to take away. But okay, fine, you can probably get away with that if you've got some really strong, sharply drawn characters with interest in arcs to hold the narrative together. And this, I think, is where Civil War really lets itself down, because our four main characters are just as vague and poorly understood as the war itself. By the end of the movie, I felt like I didn't know any of them better than I did at the start. The script gives us almost no insight into their personalities, their worldviews, their backstories, and past express generic people as empty and interchangeable as anyone else in the film. And it feels like such a wasted opportunity with their vast age differences. The main characters represent three different generations of the same profession, and it would have been easy to work that into the group dynamic. Sammy, who was probably old enough to remember the unrest and chaos of the civil rights, Zara Lee, who grew up in the dark days of the war on terror, and Jesse, whose life has been dominated by war right there on our doorstep instead.